Hello, Mike. Welcome
Hello,
again.
Jack. Happy Thursday.
Happy
By the
Thursday.
way,
Mhm.
such a pleasure meeting your sons. Chips off the old block, as one can say, right? There you go. Like it all makes sense now. But did
Yeah.
you guys
Huh?
stay and have some more fun after I left, or did you?
Yeah. We went to a few more rooms and
Good.
listened to very loud heavy metal music, which
Perfect. Perfect.
uh,
How did that go?
which yeah, very good. So there was a gentleman from I think from Germany or something like that, and I asked him to crank the AC/DC tune, and he did, and
Cool.
it was really cool. There was a little bit headbanging going on as well.
Why not? Yeah, I mean, actually, AC/DC is also fairly well recorded. You probably have noticed that it actually does sound better in hi-fi. Some of them don't sound quite as
Mm,
good. I don't know,
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
but that's cool. Play some Tool. Nobody plays Tool. I mean, they're also the same. These
Yeah, Tool, yeah, yeah. They didn't have Tool, yeah, but yeah, yeah,
seems like
it
that's
was a
one of the
good.
things, in an audio show that has changed so much is people used to carry around all these things, right? And so,
Mm,
there's this kind of
yeah.
you play my record. It always feels like a DJ to me, right? I'm at a party. Can you play my favorite song? I don't know. It's just sort of interesting that people carry it around, and now we just kind of assume. And actually, it's pretty recently, over the past few years, people kind of assume you can just play anything that exists, which
Mm,
is
mm,
still amazing because a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
people didn't do that. They didn't want to pay for the Wi-Fi. Anyway.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that so many people were carrying vinyl
Hmm.
records and such a huge comeback. And then it was also interesting that if somebody played a CD, they were kind of mentioning, "Oh, I'm just playing a regular CD," like as if there was like some sort of a different CD standard or something. But I guess that's what you get, if they are selling you like speakers that are like $25,000 each, or something. And I'm not exactly sure that the quality. I mean, the quality is there. There's no question, but I don't think it's a $25 per speaker quality. I think maybe it's kind of like buying a Lamborghini. You're. I don't know.
Yeah, it would make more sense if it was a little bit more like automobiles because I think there's a similar function, right? Like if I'm going to pick up groceries in my Lamborghini,
Hmm.
it seems a little bit of a mismatch, right? I should be on the
Yeah, yeah.
Autobahn, right?
Hmm.
There's only certain situations, and I think there's certain music that is almost tailored to the Lamborghinis of the world.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like this sounds good. Well, honestly, it sounds good on everything. That's the trick, is like they're
Yeah.
engineered to sound
Hmm.
good. That's what
Hmm.
musicians and engineers do, right? What I find more interesting, and the reason I've not really I don't get as involved as I used to, was Atmos, because I start to realize like most of the decisions being made are being how do we take this music and put it into two speakers? And
Yeah.
that is a huge compromise for, right, in general.
Hmm.
It's really hard and it takes a lot of decisions that are just sort of behind the scenes. And we're kind of coming out, it's sort of like saying, hey, on this stage, and you probably experienced this, I've done once or twice, watching someone on stage, right? Okay,
Hmm.
well, there's only certain things you're going to do, right? Sooner or later, yeah, they put wires on you and you can fly like you're Peter Pan. Sooner or later, they can like make sets that sort of, do something, but those things are very hard to do, right? They're not day to
Hmm.
day things because you're sitting there in the audience and you're pretty much entertained just by human beings saying
Yeah.
lines, like it's pretty entertaining.
Hmm.
That's why I think all music's really pretty good. You don't need these really, really fancy machines to make it good. Especially if you're like a movie, right? Movies can
Yeah.
change and do anything they want. So you're kind of using these old-fashioned constraints to make stereo music. And that so I only
Hmm.
saw every system is really just a constraint that doesn't really matter once you have object oriented sound, right? Because then you can just put sound anywhere you want. That
Yeah.
seems very, very elaborate to explain. But I know it just is, to me, it's like, well, this is just a choice. You see what I mean? Like stereo music's a choice. It isn't inherent, right, in the music itself. Because if you saw people play, it's almost always in mono. That's what I'm saying. Like if you went to a band, like it's always in mono. You can maybe hear a little this and that, but usually you just want to hear everything, right?
Yeah, yeah. A piano, the classical piano will be mono, right? The
Yeah,
trumpet will be
everything's
mono, right?
mono. Right,
The
right.
classical guitar is mono,
I
but
mean,
then
technically, a
there's
whole orchestra is mono,
yeah.
right? To us.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Well, in
maybe
row
this.
40, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
like, you do hear
yeah,
the room, but usually the
yeah,
music comes as a whole rather
yeah,
than bits and pieces. So
yeah,
fun stuff.
yeah.
Oh, so another thing. So I sent you a tool, and I don't know if you got a chance to play with it, but I would like to see what you think. And it was the
Mm-hmm.
tool where you take a spreadsheet and then you start asking questions about it. So it's basically
Mm.
it's tied into an LLM. Did you get a chance to look at it?
No, I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't have
No,
the
no, no.
chance to do it this
Don't be
week.
sorry. I'm curious because you would have a good contrast between a tool, right? Somebody's
Mm.
designed this for you and you don't have to do anything but ask the questions, but you're in a sense designing both, right? You have the
Mm.
data, you're changing it around, and then you're designing the sort of query engine. You see what I mean? Like you're more
Yeah.
in the middle of it. And I'm just curious because one of the learnings about AI is like what are the what's the range of use? Right? I don't think this is not a general purpose tool, even though it kind of acts like one. I think it has sweet spots, and we're just figuring some of those out.
Well, and the qualitative, the story aspect of everything is actually one of the sweet spots. I think AI has a very strong capability to build those stories and evoke emotions. I think that works probably better than those things that are kind of like maybe generate a piece of code or generate a visualization of a function. So I have a feeling that there is like more room to kind of play and more room to kind of like create like really significantly like breathtaking outcomes comparing to some other applications where you would be inclined to think, oh, I mean, as a coding tool, AI should be really fantastic because computer code is really deterministic language, right? Like, I mean,
Sure.
there's very few interpretations of what of what the code is supposed to mean. So therefore, it should be an easier task. But I think that the AI actually handles the Gödel abyss, right? So the abyss is basically something. Hey, there is going to be natural languages have like possibly infinite amount of meanings that it can represent, right? Even a single sentence may be infinitely complex, right? And that should have been a more complex task for the AI, but actually it's not. Or maybe it's just a
Sure, sure.
certain
Well, I
surface
mean,
phenomena, supported by my superficial understanding. That could be true as well. But if you are a poet, right? And I'm not. But if you are a poet, you tend to interpret very little language in a number of different ways, right? And that's what poetry is about. And then here you have maybe a page-long story. To me, it could be extremely deep. Maybe AI is superficial, but to me it could be very deep. So it's kind of an interesting subject.
oh, absolutely. And by the way, did you know that now I think if this is a thing that I'm very, very deep into this Bayesian worldview.
Mm.
And thanks in a way to our earliest collaboration, right? Which because that was sort of your what you brought to that project, right? Was the clustering algorithms to help build the system that we published together back in the day, right? So it's
Mm.
funny that it took me actually I never understood it because I don't know anything about math, but now I find myself being constantly reminded of how deeply ingrained that concept is in my own uh, mechanics, right? It's actually he was a philosopher, not a mathematician, right? But then they kind of, do you know anything about him?
They were multitasking. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I guess it was a different time. The
Yeah,
same you can say about Newton, right?
true. These
I
polymaths, right?
mean,
Like they
yeah,
just
yeah.
whatever, it didn't. There was no, corp mental. You had to figure it all out, which makes some sense
Yeah.
too.
But
Yeah, it
I
was
think
just.
a useful thing to look at, the probabilistic stuff is actually through the lens of fuzzy logic. Like, uh, if you have fuzziness, right, something is kind of like in this category, but it can be kind of in a different one. So then in my mind, I attended a few conferences and published a few papers on the subject. So it's kind of useful to kind of think about, the statisticians kind of think about, bell curves, right? Like everything in the universe exists in the bell curve, right?
Mhm.
And if it's not, then we have to take a close look at it, right? But basically, you can look at the planets, and classify them, people, hamsters, Lamborghinis, right? All of those kind of exist in the bell curve. But in the fuzzy logic, everything can be kind of represented as a triangle or a trapezoid, where kind of you have an area in the trapezoid that is kind of a rectangle, and that's kind of like you are there, right? You are in that category, right? Smack like in it. But then you have like a little kind of like little triangles to it, and then where the fuzziness begins to manifest itself, like, hey, maybe an ostrich is a bird, but actually it doesn't fly, right? So you're smack in the middle, then you fly because you're a bird. But then there is always going to be like, and it's going to be those triangular tails of the class membership. So that's kind of like the extension to it, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
And don't forget, I mean, that also, to my mind, and that was one of my articles actually, was about noise, because that to me is sort of the foundation of this concept, right? Is that what is noise, there isn't any, was my thing. Like everything can be normalized, right? And Fourier transforms alone. Plus, you can throw in, I think I threw in everything into this mix because it was Shannon and Fourier, which is that even in noise, right, you can still construct signal, which is kind of mind-boggling, right? Because it is everything that went into it. And I like this concept because you're right. We try to see standard normal things as really representing reality when it doesn't really at all. It's useful, but I think you were just saying, and I was going to mention the visual thing, which is Mandelbrot sets, right? So, these are inherent to the way everything works, right? Because they're repeating, they are minimum in their use of energy to create really, really complicated things that happen. But I think when we come post facto and try to understand Lamborghinis, we apply these methods to it, and a lot of that has to do with having a very, very narrow set, right? Like that's why Guinness, and he just was mad about his grain, So he came up with all this math, right? Because you're like, hey, you're selling me some crummy grain, but I can't look at every grain. How in the hell am I going to know if this is a terrible, uh, you know, uh, it's going to make my Guinness taste bad, right? Or I'm paraphrasing this story, but it worked, right? And it did work, but it's so completely narrow. It makes you think that the universe works like that. Does that make any sense?
yeah,
Yeah, and it
yeah,
doesn't.
yeah.
The universe is a form seeking, right? It normalizes everything to the point that you don't notice. I wrote this thing about E equals MC squared just the other day, and I'm like, I think of AI as being, or the formula of attention as being like E equals MC squared. I think it's that significant, and it is not inevitable that you figure out how to make the bomb. Although right now, I think we're still figuring out, like, is this going to destroy you see what I mean? It has this feeling like we could just, that it's such a primal force, but I still think we're quite early. Yeah, it's very early on in this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But it definitely has the potential, right? That we could have a world order, and both you and I are very keen to make it a good thing. We won't let it go bad, although it is
Yeah,
destructive, I guess. Maybe. I don't think it is,
yeah.
but I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the class that you will be teaching on qualitative stuff is kind of significant because in statistics or in machine learning, it's really kind of about frequencies, right? So the bell curve is it's like how many people do this, or how many planets are this big, or how many galaxies are spinning this way versus the other way, right? So for us, right, it's kind of like, hey, that's nice to know, but for me, I'm looking at the project and I'm hating it, right? Or I'm looking at the project and I'm loving it. Those frequencies really kind of don't apply to me that well, don't help me too much, for me to know that I'm on that side of the bell curve, right? But if we have a story that kind of, or emotional model that kind of helps me kind of understand why this project is great for me or versus I hate it, right? That's kind of like that's why this large language model craziness is so useful, right? Because it
Oh,
it can have this
it's
dialogue.
essential.
Yeah,
Essential because
yeah.
people couldn't do it. We do it all the time, but we do it
Mm.
based on tons of bias, right? Like we just kind of put our finger in the wind, and as you get more and more experience, uh, things change, which is it's a good segue into I guess I need some better titles for things, but it's the flow system. I have this affinity to the word flow, right? Because
Mm.
it's this transcendent state that
Yeah.
people like. That's all, right? You don't, and it's rare, right? And it's also, uh, I think, valuable because as we see it or we witness it, we're like, wow, how did that happen? And it was just like, I don't know, lost track of time, just started, this thing all seemed to work, and I got it to come together and invented, whatever. Newton was in the flow state a lot, you can imagine,
Mm.
like everything just sort of made sense, right?
Mm.
And sometimes it isn't reliable, but what is reliable, and I think what we're trying to figure out is another subtlety, which is emotional
Mm.
attachment. So if I have a to-do list or a bucket list, actually a bucket list is a good example. So I teach information architecture, right? And I say, well, all this course really is about how to sort a list. I'm like,
Mm.
that's it. If you've ever sorted a list, that's exactly what all of these techniques are for, right? So
Mm.
if you said, hey, there's a bucket list, you can sort them in any which way, but most of them tend to have to do with this emotional thing, right? I'm going to be dead soon. So I have to prioritize going to see the pyramids in Egypt or whatever the hell was on people's bucket
Mm.
list, right? But what if that didn't happen? Well, maybe this one is more important. And so there's tons of emotional uh, uh, resources used in order to make these sortings happen. And what you and I both said is that, well, good, now we have this machine that can kind of sort this stuff for us so that we can think a little clearer, because thinking about this can be difficult. You might not know, at least in my estimation, that seeing the pyramids is kind of a letdown because right behind it is Cairo and it's kind of crappy, and it's
Mm.
it's this weird dichotomy of something incredibly ancient and something new and vaguely dysfunctional. It's like someone just was writing, my wife was explaining, they said how they were in some other country. Oh, it's China. And they were just like, man, China is like way ahead of us. Like all the things that you could never imagine working in America are just taken for granted of in China. Okay. And I said, of course, well, it depends, right? I mean, I've been to Japan, and Japan is much like that. It feels like you're in the future. Things that we don't find a priority, they do. But everyone can agree the minute you land in LaGuardia, it's hell. Or not, LaGuardia is actually nice. Sorry, it's JFK that's hell. They just redid. But if you land in JFK, like nobody's nice, nobody cares that you're there. Everything is confusing, right? Everything's vaguely shabby. You see what I mean? And that,
Mm.
and this is kind of our gateway into how you feel about a place. Do you feel like, hey, everything is great, right? No, but of course, if you landed in O'Hare, maybe you would to see what, there's this sort of bias, of course, right? But the same feeling of just having these experiences, they're emotional experiences. And they may actually have something to do with investment or a whole bunch of things under the counter, but you are going to have an immediate emotional attachment or dislike to many things. So that's my lead in. What problem are we actually solving? So our flow system. Teams and individuals are typically measured by outcomes and deliverables. Fair. But outcomes alone don't reliably indicate long-term growth, adaptability, or innovation. We're already tracking tasks, timelines, and KPIs, yet we regularly miss the deeper signals, engagement, friction, momentum, and recovery that actually drive sustainable success. Shark Tank, ready?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is consistent with what you've been saying before about, the teams being measured by outcomes and deliverables. I think you were saying during the last meeting is that yes, they may be measured, but they are measured incorrectly, right?
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
are you gonna get to it?
Yeah, well,
I
yeah. No, that's fair. So how
because
about this? So
we've
we are
been
going to build a
all right.
system that tracks how people engage with tasks and projects emotionally and rhythmically over time.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Rather than merely measuring productivity, we're measuring confidence intervals for successful outcomes using understandable patterns of engagement, drift, and recovery. So I guess these are our state management things. So there's no new tasks. It's just better signals from work that's already happening. That's one of the things, has to benefit more than one person. There's no judging or micromanaging. There's clear narrative-driven insights and should be less performance anxiety. The whole goal of this is this feeling of psychological safety, right? Because anything that you do is going to be fraught with learning. That's the good thing, right? But you can easily be thrown off by all sorts of things, right? We just know distractions are much easier than focus. And you can get feedback that's may or may not be useful. So what our methods are, our systems intentionally designed around a robust and adaptable methodology. We're not bound to a single AI model or platform. This was a later thing. I kept thinking like, this is AI driven, but it's not like you have to have 3.5 or something, right? Like it should work with AI, but AI is not going to like be, again, too much flavor is not coming from AI, but I'll get into that. And so we'll just improve as models improve. But I have a feeling models right now are they're pretty good because I'm playing with 4.5, it's fine. 3.0, it's fine. They're fine, right? Like flavors, we don't need to worry about it. So we've got three actors now. We've got creators, and you can think of them as being, I don't know, employees, students. I don't know. I'm putting them both. So their goal is to grow, experiment, and to learn. Right? That's their thing. Like they're supposed to be engaged. Engagement. We can just say certainly from a student point of view, if you're not engaged, everything goes south. And getting people engaged is a big part of most businesses, right? There's going to be lots and lots of effort made to engage someone, but we're going to give people a boost with the system. Then there's strategists. So that could be a teacher. It could be a manager. See, pretty good so far. And what they're trying to say is, are our plans working, right? That's their main thing. Like, are the goals that we've come up with, are they actuating, or were these bad goals? Did we think of something, right? But the goal of the strategist is to get feedback on how well things are going without micromanaging. Am I still with you so far, kind of with this? Yeah. I've added one more role though, stakeholders. So this is leaders, investors, or deans, right? So there are stakeholders, and I actually added a whole new money thing to this, which hopefully you will be amused by, because guess what? Money ruins everything. So you might as well figure out how to get the money part involved. So what they want is they want organizational health trajectories. You see what I mean? They need to know, in a sense, rather than just EBITDA, what is actually happening, right? So that they can make no decisions or better decisions for bigger picture items. So I've got a bunch of things about what it does. I think the main core of this is some kind of a feedback mechanism, and it's probably going to be AI, or not AI, but it's probably going to be sort of a chat-driven thing. And I keep thinking Slack is a really natural for this, but you might use other tools. Do you use Slack at
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Slack's great, right? It could easily do what it needs to do, which is if you engage with it and you're working on a problem, so there's probably a couple aspects. You need to have some sort of a map, which to me is synonymous with Jira, or it's synonymous with Monday, or it's, whatever. There's some map, and we're not going to get into all the tasks, but that's usually what you do each day. Is like, oh, I've got to write the SQL code, right? I mean, or whatever your tasks are, there's some level of importance and difficulty and all these things, right, that are in your head, and you're going through them, and what might happen is as we all do, we either get distracted or we have to go into a meeting, or you know what I mean, and then you sort of have the checkpoints be either formal, which obviously might not work. Like I kind of feel like you might work late at night, which is not something I'm going to do. Like, I mean, I could, but the thing is, you're going to have a rhythm of some sort of how and when you could feel the most engaged. And what I've learned in my prior positions is that you immediately screw that up constantly by checking in with people, because then they just wait until the check-in before. It's terrible. Anyway, doing things and being telling people what you're doing are two different things, because one is more experimental. Hopefully it's more fun, it's more engaging, but it's also more frustrating because maybe you just don't know. And so there's more unknowns that you have to work through. And the more interruptions you have, the easier it is to, well, you've probably been with those people that are like, God, I work, I was in meetings all day, so now I have to work all night. Have you ever heard that one before?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, to me, that's pure hell, right? Because I just don't work well at night. So I could have meetings all night, but that doesn't ever seem to happen for some reason, right? So there's a feeling like you're either part of a team, you're an individual, and I do actually want to start this idea with an individual version, which is, hey, I'm just going to get feedback, and then I'm going to be able to have the AI create some sort of a map, an emotional map, or emotional ranking, or something that it can abstract based on me maybe I'm chatting with it, because I actually asked GPT, I'm like, we are having this conversation right now. You could rank this. How engaged am I? You know what I mean? How focused am I? And so on and so forth. And if AIs are going to be just kind of a helper, which I think they're pretty good at, then you're easily able to kind of have a second layer of abstraction. And the whole point is, we don't want to be nosy. We just want to kind of get a gauge. Are you engaged or not? And when are you engaged? And for how long? Right? So that you then can get feedback from the system saying, hey, it seems as though you get the most stuff done from 7 to 11 at night. And if your strategist, right, knew this about you, I'd give you the day off. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, well, if you're not really engaged and you're not doing much during the day, like, that's fine. You don't need to be there. If this is your flow, if this is when you get things done, because my goal is to get things done, right? It isn't to tell you that only worthwhile effort happens between the hours of 9 and 5, with a break in between for lunch.
Yeah.
That's just a convention, right? That's just this kind of old-fashioned idea that productivity is time-based.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I
Okay.
get it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So now we've got some measurement. Then we're going to look and we're going to use that measurement in order to inform our strategist in some ways, right? The strategist needs to know, hey, this is the worst plan. Nothing
Mm.
seems to be going right yet. I still think there's some idea for serendipity, right? Let's just say everyone on the thing uses this new tool in order to not work and just go, throw the football around or play video games, right? So you should start to see a lack of any progress at all toward goals.
Mm.
So far so good, like nothing will be done, and then as a strategist that, hey, maybe it's time to leap in, or you could just start to tune the signals to the person saying, hey, well, can I help you with this? Are you really struggling, or
Mm.
you anyway, there's so many ways you can communicate things, right? I don't want to get into the weeds because often then we just get into performance theater, which is what I think is bad, right? That pretending to work is more work than work
Mm.
to me. So we don't want to encourage that, right? But we do need strategists to have some views about their plan because that's their job. I'm a teacher, right? I came up with the curriculum. I get to grade you. You see what I mean? Like I have a huge
Mm.
amount of control, except I have no control on whether or not you're engaged.
Mm.
And I can punish you for it if you're not. But is that really, you know what I mean? Is that what's helpful? This is what this is why I'm saying it's a real qualitative thing to be engaged.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I have a kind of a few comments. Maybe one main comment that I have is the question of an external system, right? So yeah, we kind of are in the flow state, right? We are kind of, so let's say we solve whatever you're talking about by a technology, AI driven something, right? So a solution. But then there is an external system that is present already, right? So like
Mhm.
in this old Charlie Chaplin movie, right? When he was kind of on the conveyor belt, and he and some other guys were supposed to turn the screw, right. So that conveyor belt unfortunately exists, right? And that conveyor belt might be turned on, like in the morning, right? And they may shut it down during lunch break, and then they may restart it, at one. So the solution that we may have in our flow state might not be compatible with the conveyor belt operations, right? And that's kind of the problem.
Well, I think, okay, so I will give you my one experience in everything working perfectly, and that was working with people who all had different jobs, but we all worked on the
Mm.
same thing and we all agreed on our roles. That was another thing, right? We agreed on the kind of things that we were going to do. And in order to keep track of everything, we just had post-it notes on the wall with people who were doing it, right? Like, so there was sort of a waiting in progress, completed Kanban-ish feeling to this. But what ended up happening is that we would each run into sort of issues. And this, again, I would say is not a high pressure Charlie Chaplin situation, right? We're solving harder problems, which I do think are actually pretty, it's understandable, right? I mean, people are seeing patients or something like that. I mean, you only get a limited amount of time. You have to come up with, you have to gather data, and then you have to come up with a conclusion, right? Or something like these are not unusual, but working together with people is the best thing, because what happened was whenever we encountered something, we just turned to the person and say, hey, can you take a look at this? And usually they could look at it, and if we didn't disturb each other too much, it only took a few minutes really to clarify a lot of things. So that was to me, that I was saying, like, the 5-minute connection is more valuable than the hour-long meeting to discuss problems.
Mm.
Because once you get to your turn, hey, my problem is, see what I mean? People have already tuned out, right? Like, people only have so much ability to focus, and thinking is hard, right? So
Mm.
thinking is the fun part. Thinking takes 20% more energy than doing physical stuff. Like it's not it's
human
not
brain,
easy.
Human brain takes a lot of energy. Yeah.
A ton, exactly. And so that's why we're constantly normalizing everything so that we don't have to think. So the flow states, though, kind of have to do with maybe not thinking, but you definitely have to prepare yourself, right? You have to be ready for when lightning strikes. So we're training, the flowing is training you, right? Every time I kind of mentioned Michael Jordan or something, right? It didn't mean that he didn't have to try to shoot the basket thousands and thousands of times, but he'd gotten over that. So then he could just strategize about how to get the ball or whatever in this situation. Like that was his only focus. He didn't have to worry about learning how to jump up and dunk. Like he already knew how to do that. And that's, I guess, what we're saying when anybody is in these opportunities, I guess, to learn something is that you have to train yourself to be ready to learn. And so we want to maximize that. But what I kept thinking is, this is like classic dashboard stuff, right? You could see the whole project and who's working on what and how well they're doing. And people are naturally competitive. And you know me, I love the Tamagotchis and all that. So you can also put in any kind of gamification you want at that layer, just so that people know it matters, Even though you're going to take the day off and work at night, you can come in and say, oh, wow, I didn't realize people had gotten so far in this thing, right? Like, and that will also motivate you, hopefully, or something. Like, oh, maybe I'll check in earlier to see, or something. Your behavior will change because just like anything, you need constant feedback. Constant feedback means good things will happen, and no feedback or inconsistent feedback will mean other things. That's why I kind of want to keep the feedback engine kind of more AI driven. You know what I mean? Like it's not like Slack where it's anecdotal, but you know what I mean? Like it's a little more, that could be a little fuzzier. But as I said, we're also using another thing, which is that we're trying to build narratives, which to me are kind of maybe where my class should go, because I'm like, building dynamic narratives around a project is a complete natural, because right now Vince is somewhere explaining what the team is doing to somebody, right? He's whatever he may know about whatever's going on, he's pulled together a narrative. Maybe there's characters involved, right? Maybe there's challenges involved, but either way, that's your job as a strategist, is to build a narrative. And I think it's interesting, like, what if that narrative got updated? And this is my Bayesian confidence that you can update your model. You can learn from new information, right? So what happens right now is that you put plans in place, and by the way, everything goes to hell, and you have to keep updating the plan, which is taking you away from executing the plan. Do you see what I mean? Like it isn't self-sufficient yet. I think we can get insight through AI and rebuild some narratives constantly, right? Especially as we start to think about, well, if we're doing confidence level, how much are people engaged is all we're trying to understand. So that's a really good measurement if people are just not engaged as to the success. Even let's say you've got a 90% confidence level in your task with 2% engagement. That is the most interesting thing I have ever experienced. That means your team is completely underutilized, right? Right? These tasks are way too uninteresting and the goals are not worthwhile. See, I've already sold my own vision of this, right? But if your teams are over stimulated and making no progress, I mean, all of this is like natural for a teacher, right? Isn't that all you're trying to figure out? Unless you're just a lecture junkie, and you just want to get up there and wow them.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, but well, yeah. So that's interesting. I mean, there's probably a lot of research in that area that we can look into. I mean, an extreme case, and I'm not necessarily condoning it, would be, how how the government is motivating people to actually being a soldier, right? Like, hey, you are telling a young person that, hey, you're supposed to go and go into that ditch, and fight, right? And kind of put yourself in great danger and a terrible inconvenience, and you're gonna be exposed to a lot of bad things. And still, people do it, because they are very strongly motivated, and so that kind of a motivation in an extreme case is possible. So I think that it would be really kind of interesting to look at the angle that AI could kind of like have to, let's say, motivate team members in the corporate enterprise environment to kind of do something that would be kind of million times more pleasant than kind of being in war, right? So yeah, I guess there's something to it. I mean, I think we should be able to do it, but um, then there is also kind of the other kind of end. Who is the receiving party, right? How is the story supposed to be tailored to an individual? And then there is multiple types of individuals. There is going to be the natural scribes in the team, and there's going to be natural planners, and there's going to be people who are naturally into kind of innovation, but there is going to be people who will be the opposite. There will be the followers, right? So I think then there's going to be, hey, do we change the team, or do we convert an innovator into a follower, right? And then that might be another task that might be maybe hard, or maybe not so hard. So this is kind of an interesting kind of system that could mean a lot of different things.
Well, I think underlying it, I have this concept like you have a job description and or a resume. You see what I mean? Like you've got some text that sort of purports to be about you, right? So when problems arise, like I just asked it to help build my MVP. So I kept thinking like, well, I didn't think. That's what's fun about it. Like thinking of how to build an MVP is really challenging, right? And I've been in those meetings and it can take 6, 7, it can take weeks. I mean, actually, I was in planning for weeks in my old job, and it was a huge company-wide thing where anyway, it was a lot of work. I don't think our plans were all that. You see what I mean? Like it really was, it was down to the real unknowns were team capabilities and motivation, right? That was hard to know, plus capabilities. So I was always thinking with this capability map as sort of like your constant, like your character. We love RPGs, right? So your character can grow. I mean, that's the whole fun of RPGs. It also, by the way, gamifies it even more if you can get more achievements or get a raise or change your level or whatever the hell you could do. These are all possible right now. They just aren't easy to quantify, right? Or easy to even understand, because if Vince was talking about you, he would probably go off of your tenure and your abilities and a lot of things that he knows about you that are past, right? Like you're not that person anymore. You're a different person today, right? Your motivations are different. Yet people are very slow to update their models, right? Just because it takes way too much work. But the AI wouldn't have any problem with that, right? I mean, it could certainly start to help you understand your engagement better, which is where I want to start, anyway, right? It has to benefit the user more than it has to benefit anyone else. But I love this strategist role, right? Because that is a real thing. I'm a teacher. I put a lot of work into a curriculum. I don't ever want to put more work into it because I'm lazy. But I do know that if my students are going to start to decline in their engagement and they're going to ask me like, hey, when are you going to introduce AI tools? You see what I mean? I'm starting to realize like I do need to get my game going, like I have to rise to the occasion. I can't just say like, come on, this curriculum worked last year. Why, the principles haven't changed. I only teach English, but or I'm just kidding. But do you know what I mean? Is that role I think is really a fun role now, whereas I actually I don't get any feedback. Students are way too nice to me, just like we're all nice to our boss. You know, we don't want to be seen as struggling or trying to grow or learn. You know, I mean, all these things are just kind of like negatives in at least many of the work situations I've been in, right? Because struggle is usually better shared. Anyone who goes out and tries to uh, win a baseball game realize it's a struggle. You know, like you need a lot to happen in order to grow, come together as a team. Even though you might be great at being at bat, you know what I mean, you're gonna have to be at third base.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
hate sports metaphors, but it worked. I don't know. But do you want to hear the best part, now that we're
Hmm.
almost out of time?
All right.
Money. So guess what? You have to fund all this stuff, right? People don't have unlimited budgets, and anything that you do, you might have to hire people or you might have to outsource, or who knows what you have to do, right? So money is a underlying thing. So what can we do for the money people? And I think you've already figured it out, is we already now have a derivatives market, right? We have tasks and goals and we have
Hmm.
confidence intervals. So basically that is all a derivatives market is, right? You bet. Well, you can bet on either side, right? You can fund or defund things, right? This is
Hmm.
where it becomes interesting because if you bring that in, it almost closes the loop. It almost means, weirdly enough, this does not have to be in a business. This could be Kickstarter. You could just have a series of ideas and a series of people, right? And you have like transparency into completion, and then people can bet on your ability to well, and I say bet, I don't mean bet, fund, right? Like derivatives are funding an underlying, right? Something complicated like Apple Computer is just a weird underlying, right? And you can buy stock in Apple and be a, you know, be long in Apple, which is fine, or
Hmm.
Nvidia or whatever, right? You
Yeah,
have
it's a bet.
confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still,
Yeah.
yeah, you're just saying that right now I could come in. But when you have a derivatives market, you understand change. Change is the thing that you're actually wanting to be on the right side of. So while projects, my project that I'd like to fund is the ones that are the hardest. And this, I don't know if you ever heard this analogy, but or this story, but it was fascinating. Was the blue LED? The story of the blue LED was some guy funded by this company in Japan, and they just said, go off and work on it. And he worked on it for, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years. I don't know. It took forever because it was a really hard problem, right? Almost
Hmm.
unsolvable problem. But they just gave him enough time and money to work on it. And many would say, like, what a bunch of idiots you are, right? Like, you know, you don't just go let people work for years on end. But they did, and out of it came the blue LED. And of course, out of it can come nothing, right? It's not a sure bet. But when you start to realize, I think you're a Kubrick fan, I'm sure, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick has a very interesting model of how he made his movies, which is he didn't have a very big crew, but he took forever. He didn't want to rush, right? He just said, I'm going to
Hmm.
do this as cheaply as I can, even though his movies look amazing, right? But they took forever, which was not the model, right? The model is make his money as quick as possible. I think that's a model. But they let him do this because it didn't cost him much. And every once in a while, it's like, oh yeah, people liked your movie. Great. You know, we're good with
Hmm.
that. Right. So you have, you know, in your portfolio, let's call it in a company, you might have a lot of these, which actually enables people to have more stability with very difficult problems rather than being, hey, you know, we've got the, I always felt like here's the problem of the week, you know, like here's the problem of the week, you know, get on it. Okay, we got through it. Yay. Okay. And then you get another one next week. Right.
Hmm.
So a little cynical, but not too bad. But what do you think? Not bad, right? Because
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
you've got all three things sort of as actors. And I call it, what
Hmm.
did I call it? Like the dean. You know, I was like, hey, the dean sooner or later has to figure out who to fire and who to hire. You know, like where do they get their information from except from this system, you know? Honestly, I don't know where they get it now. I used to be in the weekly, C-suite meeting, right? And I still just never really understood like what it was for, other than just getting together,
Mm.
chatting, having a good
Well,
time.
the social aspect is important. Yeah, I guess, you are in the club, right? And
Well, it's
uh,
still, yeah, I mean, I think social things are extremely important, but I don't know that they always translate into better nurturing situations,
yeah.
right? Because I think that's where I was kind of wondering, like a lot of people get a lot, they're really good at social situations. They can make, they're like my boss was throwing birthday parties every day, it seemed, for our very small team. But you know what I
Mm.
mean? That's what they liked to do. And other fun stuff. And to me, I was like, it didn't really, it was a lot more work than I wanted to do because I was responsible for buying the birthday presents and doing I was sort of
Mm.
like had to do all the hard tasks, I felt like, of and they just got to be the party person and they had the party hat on and they're like, yay, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, well,
Bad memories.
maybe there is something to it, right? Like in the show, the Office, right now, Michael Scott is doing exactly the same thing, but if we peel some of the layers of craziness, he had actually the underlying model that he had was that to know basically as much as possible about his employees, right? And on the emotional side, on the private side, right? So we are kind of thinking about the flow model that is kind of like the underlying knowledge of Michael Scott in the show The Office, where he kind of knows what's going on, right? And he is completely dysfunctional, but he has deep knowledge about the customer. He has deep knowledge about his team. He knows all everything about the preferences of everybody, so he can tailor the product. He can talk to the customer. He understands that, hey, sometimes you have to go to a restaurant and spend the whole day there, and trade dirty jokes with the customer. And so we are talking about this kind of level of flow that the AI can infer from daily enterprise or office dynamics, that will be manifested by emails, meetings, transcripts. Probably HR documentation probably is going to be the last one, because that's the one that is not going to be updated very frequently, and people would be kind of probably unhappy if let's say that extremely private stuff goes there, right? It's probably people will be much more comfortable with kind of go those profiles and everything going into the neural network rather than the file cabinet in HR, right? So but yeah, I think this is kind of, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Well, and I hope there's a level of abstraction that I think only AI can provide. Like AI is
Mhm.
essential to being, I actually had a God, way too long argument. By the way, you can tell it to argue with you, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. So, but the argument was about bias, right? And
Mhm.
going back to our opening salvo, we've only got 1 minute left, but the opening salvo was like, I said, bias is being human, right? We cannot not be biased because otherwise we'd have to be using our brains way too often. We wouldn't work after a while, right?
Mhm.
So you have all these things, whereas my hope is that we can start to abstract the layers well enough that we're just talking about engagement, right? We're not talking about niceness or fit or all the Michael Scott
Mhm.
things that he uses to manipulate people, by the way, right? So and also insult people constantly, which is the joke, that he knows what gets under your skin. And we don't have to be the who's the character who's bemused all the time. The It used to be
Well, there is Dwight Schrute, right? That is
no,
that
no, no,
is the
he's
kind of
not. But
like
yeah, he's no,
the
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 one who's
mirror.
the audience surrogate, right? Who just
Mhm.
Jim. So
Uh,
Jim just doesn't care. You see what I mean?
mhm.
That's his superpower, right? And I don't want that to be true. In fact, I want people to be engaged in my class. I want people to enjoy their work, right? I want there to be just a different measure of success that we couldn't do before because it just was too hard, right? We could only just say, all right, amount of jobs done, 20, great job this week. That kind of thing. Well, really,
Mm.
really, it doesn't work like that. I mean, maybe if you're selling paper, it does, but I don't know. Is that a good enough end spot to
Oh yeah, this is a great ending. Yeah.
stick the landing? If you're just selling paper, you probably might not need this system, but maybe. I don't know. All right. Well, continuing to work on it. This is still more at the architecture phase, but anything
Okay.
you can do to push me along is helpful. But we'll talk next week.
All right. Thank you, Mike. See you next week.
Thank you, Jack.